I'm Bobby Kurshan, and I'm going to talk about entrepreneurial mindsets. I am an entrepreneur, I'm an investor, I'm a researcher, so I've done all of the things that I think are important to be an entrepreneur and to think about entrepreneurial mindsets. But I think what's most interesting to me, I'm currently a professor at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and one of the areas we're doing a lot of research around is entrepreneurial mindset. What is it? How do we find out if somebody has an entrepreneurial mindset? And most importantly, how can we use that information to determine which people will do best in our masters in entrepreneurship, which people will be better members of an incubator, which people will be able to be successful entrepreneurs. We're not suggesting that this is the only line at which you make that decision, but we are suggesting that there's some interesting research. So we're going to talk about innovation, entrepreneurial mindset and education, and entrepreneurs. So who are you in the audience? How many of you are teachers? Okay, good. How many of you are entrepreneurs? How many of you are researchers? And you can be more than one. How many of you are investors? Good. How many of you are school leaders? Oh, great. And how many of you are whatever other is? You're a researcher. And other too, right? Okay, so obviously we have a mix of what I call the ecosystem in entrepreneurship and innovation. And that ecosystem, which you saw on the last slide set, is a really important part of what's going to happen in innovation and how we create innovation. Okay, next slide. So how many of you think you're an educator? Even if I didn't, different between being a teacher. How many of you think in some way you're an educator? Everybody in this room is an educator. If you're a parent, you're an educator. Okay, next slide. How many of you think of yourself as an entrepreneur? Okay. A lot of people in this audience think they're entrepreneurs. Okay, how many of you think of next slide. How many of you consider yourself an innovator? How many of you think an innovator and an entrepreneur is the same thing? Good. So, the next slide. So how do you define innovation? Let's start there, and then we can think about what an entrepreneurial mindset is. And by the way, I tell my students in my master's class that while innovation and entrepreneurship are not the same thing, they're very synergistic. So we need to think about first about innovation and then about entrepreneurs. So turn to the person next to you or behind you and tell them how you would define innovation. And introduce yourself. Okay, next slide. So we define innovation as many things, but it's usually defined as making a difference with a creative idea. And it requires you to have a purpose to make an innovation. It requires you to look out beyond what you think of innovation is or what you're currently doing, take some risks. It requires you to be able to experiment, to try out new ideas and not be afraid to do that. It requires you to collaborate. We're going to do a collaboration exercise at the end. And it requires you to feel empowered to make a difference and to make change. And it requires you to refine and bridge this vision with execution. So we can be very innovative, and I can sit in a room and give you all sorts of innovative ideas, but that's not innovation if something doesn't change or empowers. That's design thinking, and that's thinking about change, but unless you make it happen, you're not an innovator or change. Is an innovator the same as an inventor? No. So we're talking about innovation, not invention. And was Steve Jobs an innovator or an inventor? Steve Jobs was an innovator. He took really good ideas of other people, he iterated on them, and he created something new. But he never created something new from scratch. The iPad exists, the iPhone existed. There were other ideas of that long before Steve Jobs created it. Let's go to the next slide. So how do you define entrepreneurship? Turn to the person next to you and tell them what you think entrepreneurship is. All right, next slide, please. So, entrepreneurship. How many of you I'm sure you have slightly different definitions, but in a minute we're going to deconstruct what's important about it. An individual process that starts with the discovery of an opportunity, which becomes creatively developed into an economic and/or social opportunity. So, how many of you had the words an opportunity, creative, innovative, requires you to develop something that is an economic change or a social opportunity? You can invent something that has no impact. I've invented a better way to put my kid to sleep or process, but I haven't had any impact unless other people use it and scale it. So one of the things that's very important about entrepreneurship, not that we all get there, but we have to think about the impact of what we've developed economically and or socially. So that's an important part of it. And right now in our students' class, everybody wants to be a social entrepreneur. That's really hot. We all want to do well and do good. But there still has to be an opportunity for you to have an impact. Next slide. So we created at Penn Educational Entrepreneurship Program. It's a process of purposeful innovation directed toward improving educational productivity, efficiency, and or quality. Interesting definition, because we have social impact, but we want to improve productivity, efficiency, and or quality of education. So now what's happened, and I don't know if any of you have gone to the Navitas booth, but do spend some time looking at their stuff. They put things into themes, and I'm beginning to see the same themes of what we want to do in education, because what is quality? We want everybody to do better in school. We want quality curriculum. We want quality assessment. We want quality teachers. So there's a lot of things to improve upon in education that address quality. Efficiency. Most of us think school is relatively inefficient. It takes us a long time to learn what many people think we can learn in a shorter period of time. It takes us a long time to give a test, get the results, and have an impact. It takes us a long time to pay bills. It takes us a long time to figure out how to finance education. So how do we make all of those processes more efficient? So educational entrepreneurship, while is the same as entrepreneurship, is having an impact in different ways on the education space. Education entrepreneurs are visionary thinkers who create new for-profit or nonprofit organizations that redefine our sense of what's possible. And these are interesting because they're definitions. Look how old they are, first of all. They're from 2006. So as a researcher, I always tell my students, can't you find anything more recent to quote? But the truth of the matter is they both have the same idea: vision, change, quality, impact. Next slide. So what constitutes an entrepreneurial mindset? Well, we spent a little bit of time thinking about innovation, spent a little bit of time thinking about entrepreneurial mindset. So next slide. Uncertainty can yield tremendous opportunity. We looked at it in the right way. One's attitude or orientation towards entrepreneurship and attentiveness towards opportunities in general, and an active process of forging opportunity from uncertainty. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you 10 attributes of an entrepreneurial mindset that our research is coming to look at and narrow down. But the truth of the matter is, when I ask people what they think their mindset is, and I compare that to the mindset of a teacher, there's quite a bit of overlap. And there's been, most of the research being done today has been on what makes great teachers. So what is the mindset of a great teacher? How many of you in the room believe teachers are created, or we can make a teacher? We can make a teacher, or they're born a teacher. How many think you can make a teacher? How many of think teachers are born? So it has to do with mindset. What do you think? How many of you believe risk is a mindset of an entrepreneur? How many of you believe innovation or innovative is the mindset of an entrepreneur? Okay, well, let's look at what the data shows us. If you go to the next slide. So when we did this research on mindset, and we've done the background research on mindset in general, remember this is not just educational mindset, is that you have an orientation towards problem solving. And if you look at the things, creative problem solving, opportunity seeking, resiliency, and resourcefulness, those are all important skills about being an entrepreneur. It's lots of research on that. How do those apply to a teacher in the classroom, or how do those apply to an educational entrepreneur that's creating an edtech company to do professional development? Are teachers opportunity seeking? In some way they are. They're looking for an opportunity to improve that child's skills, to help that child that may not get out of the ghetto, to help that child learn better, to make a difference in the classroom. So they are looking for opportunities. They're also very resilient. They watch carefully every day when they know that they may have failed a child, and they come back into that classroom the next day and try again. And they go home at night and they think about every single child in their classroom. That's what makes a great teacher, but that's also what makes a great entrepreneur. The next slide. So how do you create a profile of a mindset? So we've looked at many profiles that are out there in the general space of mindsets. And then we tested our group of students, and we continue to test them that come into our master's program and into our incubator, and we looked at those areas where the most, on the profiles that we gave a series of profiles, and we'll be glad to share those with you. We came up with these attributes: the ability to look at opportunity, the ability to take risk, creativity, future orientation, that I'm always thinking about what the future is, the scalability of my product, the impact, take initiative, do critical thinking about what they're doing, they iterate, they change, adaptability. How many teachers have to adapt that lesson every single day when they go in the classroom because they realize that the light burned out on their overhead projector, or they learned that the child that came into the classroom isn't thinking that way? One of my great mentors once said to me, "Bobby, you just don't know in middle school, children are growing in two directions. They're growing physically and they're growing mentally. And when you get in the classroom, you don't know which day it is. So your lesson has to be changed if they're willing to be mentally growing, but if they're physically growing, your lesson plan isn't going to work. So I have to adapt." Critical thinking, problem solving, communication, and collaboration. These attributes are now what we're studying to find out how they apply and where they apply. So let's go to the next slide. So here's how we're doing our research. We've defined the mindset. We spent a lot of time looking at what we think the attributes of a mindset are. We're establishing the entrepreneurial frame in which we're going to put this mindset, defining the fact that we're in the educational space. We're not in the business space. We're not in the agriculture space. So we're looking at the frame in which the entrepreneurial mindset stands. We're seeking the opportunity to find out how to register this and report this and use it. We are focusing on the best opportunities out there. We're adapting it, and then we're executing again. So we're leading with an entrepreneurial mindset. We're testing whether that's true of the people that we think are entrepreneurs. We're re-looking at that. We're evaluating it based on our profiles, and we're changing the profiles or editing the profiles to reflect that we're working with educators. And the biggest question I have as a researcher, and maybe one of you in the audience have the answer, is there any difference between an education entrepreneur and any other entrepreneur? And it's still an open question in our research. We think there are subtle differences, but we're not sure. We don't have any evidence in our data yet to say that there's much difference between giving our profile to a business entrepreneur that's doing something to create something in high tech, or giving it to a teacher. So let's look at the next slide. So how do we measure this mindset? Currently, we're using a profile that was developed for business called the EMP. It's out of Eckerd College in Florida, and it bases its scale on two, on a personality scale and a skills scale. So the personality scales looks at future focus, idea generation, execution, self-confidence, optimism, persistence, and interpersonal sensitivity. And the skills scales looks at independence, preference for limited structure, nonconformity, risk acceptance, action-oriented, passion, and need to achieve. So these are skills versus personalities. And that's subtle in education where we're trying, because if you try to look at this once we've done the test, how different is self-confidence from independence? And how do you differentiate the skill that you can teach independence, can you teach self-confidence? So that's the differentiation that we're trying to use. Which of these skills can we teach? Which of these skills do you bring to the table as an individual to identify? This has been the interesting part of the research. We're still struggling with it, but it's been fun. The next slide. So I'm going to hand out something to everybody because I'm going to find out what your mindset is. If everybody will take out their pencils and one of these sheets. Has anybody in the room done this? I think I have enough for everybody. I was optimistic in thinking there would be 30 people here, so I think I have enough. So basically, this is a challenge that we're going to look at several of your mindset abilities. Would everybody hold it up to the light? I want to make sure you can see the circles on both sides. If you turn it over, can you still see the circles? Sort of? We'll work with that. It was supposed to be on both sides, but such is life. So I'm going to give you 1 minute. Take your pencils when I say go and create all the possible things you can create with the 30 circles and see how many different things you can create with a circle. That's all the rules. Go. I don't see any of my students in this room. They're all out partying. Okay, stop. How many of you created 30 different things? How many of you used 30 circles? Good. Because I didn't say different. I said 30 things to do with the circles. How many of you created 20 or less? 15 or less? 10? 5? Okay. How many of you created one picture out of all 30 circles? How many of you created the same thing in every circle? That's how you got 30, right? Okay. So think for a minute, turn to the person next to you, and we're going to take the same minute to talk about how you would have used the 30 circles. And we can see if you would have created more the second time than the first time. So again, talk to the person next to you or move over and talk about the exercise in a collaborative way. Go. Okay, stop. 2 questions. How many of you realize that working with the person, you would be able to find more things to do with the 30 circles? The next question is an even harder one. How many of you were less of a risk taker when you had a collaboration or more of a risk taker? How many of you thought you were more of a risk taker in thinking about the project, thinking out of the box? Working together, were you more of a risk taker or less of a risk taker? More. How many more? Good. Boy, I'd be in real trouble if you said less. Okay, so when we think about the kind of profiles we're giving to do our research, we're thinking about what active profiles we can do, what traditional profiles of asking people questions and interviews. So we are doing all three of those to establish what we think are the attributes of an entrepreneurial mindset. The goal of our research is to produce a profile that we can give and use as an indicator of entrepreneurial mindset. So if you want to go to the next slide, we'll get ready to finish. Could you start this video? So how do we look at innovation? This is one of my favorite views of thinking about innovation. Do I need? No, you do it. Okay.
I have a friend who's an artist, and he's sometimes taken a view which I don't agree with very well. He'll hold up a flower and say, look how beautiful it is. And he says, you see, as I as an artist can see how beautiful this is, but you as a scientist, oh, take this all apart and it becomes a dull thing. And I think that he's kind of nutty. First of all, although I may not be quite as refined aesthetically as he is, then I can appreciate the beauty of the flower. At the same time, I see much more about the flower than he sees. I mean, it's not just beauty at this dimension, there's also beauty at a smaller dimension. I could imagine the cells in there. Also the processes, the complicated actions inside, which also have a beauty. The fact that the colors and the flower evolved in order to attract insects to pollinate it is interesting. It means that insects can see the color. It adds a question. Why is it aesthetic? All kinds of interesting questions which the science only adds to the excitement, the mystery, and the awe of a flower. It only adds. I don't understand how it subtracts.
So, last slide, please.
The world's changing faster than ever before, and so is your job. You're now surrounded by more data, more complexity, and more so-called experts than ever before.
So
but is
I
the world
suggest you
really
think out
any
of the
different?
box. And as we're doing our research,
Because while
we're
the
trying to
questions
think out
may
of the
keep
box.
changing,
So if you leave with one thing today, you probably all have an entrepreneurial mindset. Does that make you an entrepreneur? Probably yes in some ways. Will that make you a successful entrepreneur? Not sure yet, but failure may be success. So thank you very much. So I think we have time for any questions or comments on the research. Would love anybody that's thinking about this research to let me know, and we can collaborate in some way. So any questions? Well, good. Hope you enjoy. Oh, Rich.
Earlier, you mentioned you were trying to decipher or decide if there were differences between an education entrepreneur and a business entrepreneur. Could you spend 30 seconds just talking about what the hypotheses are about where they're the same versus different?
I think one of the things we're looking at, and we haven't come up with a title, is we think there's a lot of empathy that has to be part of a education entrepreneur. It may be true of a medical entrepreneur that's looking about wellness, people that interact with people that they're trying to have an impact on a person rather than a product or a service. So that's one thing that we're thinking is empathy is a difference. The other thing we're thinking is that there is some need for a different set of skills going into being an entrepreneur. And as you know, with our capstone projects in our master's program, we often coach our teams because when an educator tries to start up a company, they bring a lot of the expertise of the knowledge of the subject matter, but they don't bring a lot of expertise in the business matter or the technology. And does an education entrepreneur need to come first from an education perspective, or does it need to come first from a technology perspective if they're building technology? Is it a chicken and egg problem, or is it a requirement of collaboration? And that's the two of the things we're looking at, empathy and what skill set they're bringing initially to the table in this creation of being an entrepreneur. It's interesting research. Yeah? Yeah, I mean, we've been trying to struggle for and Stefan talked about it too. We've been struggling for years to say, how do we assess problem-solving skills, or how do we assess innovative skills or critical thinking? So the answer is yes, I do think we can quantify them in some way, but we have to quantify them by looking at not just the traditional profile of asking questions. We have to look at the kind of 30-second questions to do some testing, and we have to do interviewing. So it's somewhat quantitative and somewhat qualitative. It's not going to be one or the other.
As it's mentioned, it can be quantified, and so an entrepreneur can be assessed by some members or keepers, and we could assess them by some measures. So do you really think that an entrepreneur can be cultivated and educated with some specific educational methodology and based on this assessment system?
Well, that goes to my question, is a teacher made or born? And I think teachers are born. I can make a better teacher. I can't make a teacher. I think it's something that's innate. I feel the same way about entrepreneurs. That's my gut feeling. That's what we're trying to use the data to determine. Can we make a better entrepreneur? Or is an entrepreneur, there are certain people that just never will be an entrepreneur. They don't take risk. They like stability. They don't like collaboration. They become accountants and sit at their desk, or they become, there are certain jobs that's not, in my definition of an entrepreneur, would become entrepreneurial. But as I look at internal entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship, then I can see that some of those same skills apply. That accountant that may be sitting at his desk may be instrumental in thinking out of the box about how the company's going to go forward or proceed, and that's extremely entrepreneurial in thinking of a creative way to do that kind of work. So I'm changing my mind as I do the research. Any other questions or comments? Yes? No. We're using the work that's already been done because there's a lot of work on that. We use a lot of Stefan's work, and we've used a lot of other work that's been done in quantifying innovation. We used Rebecca report out of Brookings, the leapfrog on innovation in early childhood, looking at examples of it. So we have a lot more data of quantifying innovation than a mindset for entrepreneurship. Although more people are beginning to look at this space, nobody's really come up with a profile. So when you think about the Myers-Briggs profile that was created and has become sort of a stable in helping people figure out how they're going to work within organizations, we're kind of hoping that we'll be able to come up with a profile that will help us not say that you're not going to be an entrepreneur, but to give us some insight into what the attributes are that will make you more successful, or the attributes that we could, the question about teaching to, the attributes that we can teach to help them be better entrepreneurs. There's a whole growth of these innovation incubator labs all over the country, and I'm not sure they're valuable. I mean, and I've run one, and we've had success, and we've had exits, but on the other hand, we need to innovate about what an incubator is, because we're saying that we can come to our incubator, we'll give you some money, we'll take equity, and we'll make you a better entrepreneur, but what is it we do better? So those are important questions that we don't know the answer to yet. Well, thank you for your time, and enjoy your cocktails.